Well, hello, Lindsey. It's so great to have you on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Davey. I'm so glad to be here.
I know. I'm so glad that we've been able to finally get this nailed down. I know it's back and forth, but I'm very familiar with your story and your work and what you're doing to bring purpose out of your pain. And I know a lot of people are going to be familiar with that as well. But I'm so glad that we actually get to sit down, spend a little time, have some conversation, and really encourage people's hearts in this. So thank you for making the time.
Yes, Davey. Thank you. I love getting to share what God's doing. And even though every time I do a podcast or talk to someone, I feel, a little bit of anxiety, but I'm like, God, this is about you.
That's right.
I just want to show people what he's doing, even in the midst of my own pain and suffering. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. I wish everybody would understand that anxiety is a normal thing, right? I think a lot of people let that resistance come again and they're like, oh, this is an indicator that I shouldn't be doing this. I'm not a natural at this. And we're like, hey, listen, none of us are naturals at this. We all feel very anxious when we step in front of a microphone or on stage, and that, there's a spiritual component to that. There's a mental and emotional component to that. But at the end of the day, God always shows up. So I know he's going to in this as well.
Yes, totally. Thanks.
Well, Lindsey, you have had quite a journey of pain and suffering, and you are continually walking that out. We have talked a little bit on the Nothing is Wasted podcast about chronic pain or chronic illness. That's part of your story. There's several other facets to your story of pain and suffering, but you are all of that is to say you are someone who is very familiar with not only walking out your own pain and suffering, but also entering into other people's pain and suffering. And you've developed an entire business and company around stepping in and being present with people while they are going through suffering. So before we kind of dive into your story and the purpose that God has brought out of it, will you just give us a little bit of context as to who you are right now? If nobody's ever heard of Lindsey Wheeler, who are you? What do you do? What's your family like? Where are you from? And
I'm really glad I went to counseling yesterday so that I can know who I am. My counselor's amazing. Yes, I'm like, that's good. I am Lindsey Wheeler, and I am married, I say, to the greatest man on earth, Chris Wheeler. And he is God's greatest kindness to me. And we have one adopted daughter, Eliana Wheeler, and she is actually, today is her last day of middle school. She is about to go to high school, which is crazy. She's about to be 15 years old, and we adopted her when she was 16 months from Guatemala. And it has been a wild journey for her. Her life is really hard, and we'll share more about that later, but she is a gift to us, and her heart is so precious. And so Chris and I, from the very beginning, just knew okay, it's going to be the three of us. And Eliana calls our family the triangle family. And she was like, Mom, the triangle is the strongest shape in the world. And we're the triangle. So we're the three of us. Yeah. And so it's our sweet little family motto that the Wheelers are going to stick together. But we lived actually in Nashville for about 16 years and recently moved back towards family. And we live in Fayetteville, Arkansas now.
Okay.
So we are now close to, both sides of our family, and we miss Nashville. Nashville's obviously super cool and hip and all of those things. So we miss it, but at the same time, it has been such a sweet year and a half of getting to be close to family. And especially Eliana, her road of life is really hard. And so to have people that get her is huge.
Yeah.
My husband was in ministry for, I think, about 18 years before this last job. He worked at a few awesome churches in Nashville, and we worked in the adoption space at Show Hope with Stephen Curtis Chapman and Mary Beth. Chris and I both worked with them for 6 years, and they are a treasure. So we've kind of had our foot in a lot of different ministries, and then God kind of said, I'm going to give y'all just like a little break from it. And so Chris is
Mm,
doing something totally different right now. He's working with one of
okay.
his friends in a tech startup, which is
Okay.
crazy. I mean, pastor to tech startup, which is
Yeah.
hilarious.
Wow.
Um, but he even said, he was like, Lindsay, I feel like I get to be even more pastoral in this
Mm-hmm.
job, getting to work with these clients than I did in some of my church positions, which is
Mm.
sweet.
Yep. Yep.
So we are in a space
Wow.
of just trusting God with every next step. I say, Chris, are we going to make it? And he says, we're going to make it. And then we say
Wow.
one minute at a time. And so that's kind of our family in a little nutshell. We have
Wow.
also a zoo of animals because our child loves animals. So we have two dogs, a cat, a hamster, a frog. So anyway, that's the Wheelers for you.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm so
Yeah.
glad you mentioned what Chris is doing and the transition that he has
Yeah.
made, because I think a lot of people listening to this think that in order to do ministry, right, or in order to
Hmm.
have some kind of purpose come out of your pain, as we talk so often about on the Nothing is
Yeah.
Wasted podcast, you have to step into a full-time ministry or vocational
Yeah.
ministry position. And actually,
And that's
most
not
people,
true.
right,
Yeah. Yeah.
95% of people are doing what we
Yeah.
call ministry camouflage, right?
Uh-huh.
Where
Totally.
they're behind the scenes in the marketplace, and that's some of the best
Yeah.
ministry that can happen there, because you're
Yeah.
stepping into spaces and spheres of influence that your pastor cannot. You just
Yes.
can't.
And people are trusting you with things that maybe they would be afraid to share with a pastor, or, there
That's
is a
right.
lot of church hurt. And so some people that are scared to step into a church might share with someone outside of it. And then, our
Mm,
heart is for the local church. Our heart is to get people plugged in and healthy. And but yeah, but it's what you said. We are all called to that, to the Great
yep,
Commission, and it looks different for every person. And it's
that's
kind of
right.
like, what is the assignment God has for me right now? And
That's
for
so
Chris,
good.
it's working in this tech startup. And for me, it's doing my little small
Yep.
business that I do. And that doesn't
Yeah.
mean we're going to be doing this 2 years from now, but like God, let us be faithful in these things. So,
That's so good. I love that. What is the assignment
yeah.
that God has for me
Yeah.
right now? Sometimes we get so
Yeah.
caught up in calling, right? And it feels very
Oh,
permanent. And it's like, no, it's about
totally.
assignment right now.
Yes.
What is
Yes.
God calling us
Yeah.
to right now?
I know we think we have to have it all figured out. And my daughter will be like, what am I going to be when I get older? And I'm like, Eliana, like, you could change every few years. Like, we're just going to
That's
do what
right.
God puts right before us. So,
That's so good.
yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Well, that plays, I have to imagine that philosophy plays a little bit into your story and maybe comes out of some of the pain and suffering that you've experienced, because, you've had quite a battle with some chronic illness. I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, but I can only imagine
Yeah.
in that you've had to remind yourself, hey, that right now, we're just going to today,
Hmm.
right? Grace for today, strength for
Yeah.
today. The Lord's going to, what are we focused on right now? But
Yeah.
why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey in some of
Yeah.
this that you've been walking through?
Yeah. I'd say Chris and I, when we were married, we were kind of on that path that every couple that's in ministry feels like they're going to be on. Like, he's going to be speaking and I'm going to be leading Bible studies, and we're going to have
Mm,
this great ministry together. And that just wasn't what God had in store for us. And kind of
mm,
everything shifted. When we adopted Eliana, we brought her home, and quickly we knew something was really, really wrong with her. And not wrong with her, that she was struggling with some physical things and emotional things. And it took everything we had, Davey. Like, for
wow.
the first 8 years of her life, she slept about 2 hours a day. And
Oh,
this went
goodness.
on. Yeah. And we had every medical professional in Nashville at Vanderbilt, like the best of the best, saying, this child
Yeah.
is a medical mystery and we don't know what to do for y'all. And I
Wow.
remember, in the middle of that, my body started getting really sick. And I remember telling Chris, like, I feel like I'm 90 years old and I'm dying. And every doctor just kept saying, well, you're, a new mom. Of course you're tired and, or you're depressed. And
Wow.
I'm like, no, I'm depressed because you're not listening to me. But over the course of about 8 years, I watched my body just start to slowly fail, along with trying
Wow.
to parent a child with severe trauma. And Chris and I, in that we ended up losing like community and friends because people didn't know what to do with us. It was like we didn't fit into
Yeah.
this box anymore. I couldn't go to church or Bible studies. I could barely make it out of bed. There was, a few years that I was pretty much bed bound. And so I
Man.
would parent from the bed. And it was just this really dark, hard season of going, God, where are you? Like, and feeling
Wow.
like my life is over, honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
there were nights that I would just say, like, God, please, like, take me in my sleep. And I know that sounds
Mm.
so um, dramatic or dark, but it just felt
Mm.
like it was the end.
Yeah.
Um, and I was supposed to go to this women's event called If with Jenny Allen, and it was her
Mm.
first If gathering. And her middle sister, Brooke, has been my best friend since 8th grade. And so I was going to go, and
Okay.
it was going to be a weekend away from Eliana, and we were going to get to celebrate what God was doing with Jenny and If. And my body was just so sick I couldn't leave. And I remember laying in bed that
Wow.
weekend and going, God, why have you forgotten me? Like I feel
Wow.
so lost and so forgotten. And my husband, who is, like I said, God's greatest kindness said, Lindsay, why don't you just watch the If gathering from your bed?
Mm.
And, at first I'm like, no, I'm mad. And I don't want to do that, but I did.
Right.
And I remember at one point, Jenny I felt like she was looking through the screen to me and said, have you disqualified yourself from the race? And
Wow.
in that moment, I just broke down weeping and thought, yes, I have. Like, I have taken myself out. I have disqualified myself, because
Wow.
I
Yeah.
truly felt like my life was over. And so I started praying and asking, like, God, what can I do from home? Like, I can't leave our
Mm.
house. Our child can't even go to Target for 30 minutes.
Wow.
It just things were so out of control, and I felt sick. But what can I do to love people without even leaving my home? And that's when God gave me the idea of Bottle of Tears. And
Mm.
it was, yeah, it truly, like, in 1 second, he was like, "Hey, guess what, Lindsay? Like, I've always loved vintage bottles. I love the
Yeah.
beauty of them. That they each have their own story, and then I loved the verse Psalm 56:8. You keep track of all my sorrows. You've collected all my tears in
Wow.
your bottle, and you've recorded each one in your book." And in that minute, I thought, I could send bottles to people with this scripture verse all over the country. Now,
Huh.
Davey, like, I am bedbound. So
Yeah.
I remember screaming out to Chris and saying, Chris, God's given me this idea for a business. I'm going to call it Bottle of Tears, and I'm going to send these gifts. And Chris is like, okay, like, great. I'm sure he's thinking, you can't even get from the bed to the couch. How are you going to do this? But
Yeah.
he was
Yeah.
so supportive. And so that's where it began. I went
Wow.
on and bought an Etsy logo for $5 and started an Instagram with 0 bottles. No, I mean, nothing. I did it and I said, I'm starting this in 10 days. And I just
Wow.
began it. Yeah. So, and God
Lindsay,
has
this is
just blown us away. Yeah.
this is crazy because here's the thing.
Yeah.
Most people who would find themselves in the same situation as what you
Yeah.
found yourself in, where you're
Yeah.
bedridden, your strength is completely depleted,
Yeah.
you have nothing left to give. You are regularly, almost every night going, God, would you just take me? Would you just take me?
Yeah.
I don't want to feel the suffering anymore, right?
Yeah.
Most people would be thinking about how can other people help me?
Yeah.
You're thinking about how do I help other people even though
Yeah.
I'm confined to this space right here? How do I keep
Yeah.
pursuing this mission that God has put me
Mm.
on Can you help me understand
Well,
that a little bit? I mean,
yeah,
I'm sure because most of us look inward when we look to our pain, right? We look,
yeah.
but you're looking in a different direction here.
So Chris was a pastor in these dark, dark points, and we felt so alone. And I think what
Mm,
I recognized is a lot of times the church does not know what to do with long suffering. It's like, if we can't
mm,
wrap this up in a few months, or like, are you still sick? Is your daughter still not okay? It's like
wow.
they people don't know what to do with prolonged suffering, and even suffering that may never have a red bow on top. And so
Yeah.
I walked, those 8 or 9 years just very alone. And you said, how are you looking to others? Like, I got to this point where I'm like, I don't want anyone to feel like I do. Like, I
Mm,
want people to feel seen and heard and loved in the middle of their pain. And because I wasn't experiencing it, I'm like, I don't want anyone to feel this. Like, how can
wow.
I help encourage others to show up for their friends and family that are suffering? And so that
Wow.
was the beginning of just this sweet journey of going, like, we don't have to give people in grief a lot of words. We just need to
Yeah.
show up. We need to
Yeah.
say, like, I see you. Like, the power of just telling someone, I see you and you're not forgotten when they're in the middle of their suffering is huge.
Wow.
And part of Bottle of Tears is I'm mailing these gifts of hope to people that are suffering. And for me, mail was gold when I
Yeah.
was not leaving my house. If
Yeah.
someone sent me a card in the mail, or like a gift card, or if they dropped off food on my porch, I mean, it was like gold. I mean, because
Wow.
I didn't feel alone for that 1 second. And so
Wow.
that's kind of the mission behind what I'm doing. It's so people don't have to feel so alone.
Wow. Man, that's amazing. You're right. This this power of presence.
Hmm.
Most people who are listening to this, maybe whether or not they could put words to it or not, they understand that words don't necessarily help, especially in those deep dark moments.
Yes.
You know, but
Yeah.
someone showing up and someone saying, "Hey, I see you.
Yeah.
I haven't forgotten you." And
Yeah.
and I think that's really poignant what you said, that we as human beings, we as the church, we don't know what to do with long suffering. We think that
Yeah.
there should be a set time where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
this should be finished by now. We're healed by now, and yet
You have your allotted grief time,
there it
and then
is.
now you're
Right,
done. Yeah.
right, exactly. And yet, Scripture, how often does it talk about long
Yeah.
suffering?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. And to have someone not fix you in the middle of it. I think
Mm,
so many people desperately, they're not okay without trying to fix you. I can't tell you how many people have said, have
yeah.
you tried this thing? And they mean well, but
Right.
like, to actually just sit with someone in
Yeah.
their grief and pain is powerful.
Right.
Job's friends did it right for the first little bit,
For a
sitting
little
with
bit,
him.
right?
And then, yes, just a little bit. But I'm
Yeah.
like, the power of just sitting with someone in it is
Yeah.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, at some point we try to, in our finite minds, we try to,
Mm.
and maybe it's because we're afraid of suffering and grief, that if
Yeah.
we can somehow put it in a box, if we can give
Hmm.
explanation to it or justification
Yeah.
to it, or point to a causal, a causation at the very, like, what's the source? What's the root of this? If we can do that, somehow it makes us feel better,
Yeah.
when the reality is there's so much suffering that we go through that really seems senseless.
Hmm.
There's no
Totally.
necessary cause behind it, where you're like, I
Hmm.
can't necessarily point back to something that has caused this, and yet God's going to do something purposeful and meaningful out of it.
Yes. Yeah. And he is so in the middle of just the details. And that's
Mhm.
what, like, a lot of times for Chris and I, our life is really hard. Our day to day,
Yeah.
Davey, is exhausting. And so for us, it's finding just these little kindnesses that God
Mm.
puts in our day. It's not waiting for maybe the huge answer prayer of like a miracle of healing, or
Yeah.
for our daughter to not have brain damage. But it's like, oh my gosh, we made her laugh today.
Mm.
And that was the most beautiful thing in the whole world. And
Wow.
celebrating the heck out of the little kindnesses that God
Yeah.
gives. And because people will say to me, like, Lindsay, how do y'all have joy in the midst of this? Or like, how
Yeah.
is it fake?
That's
Is this fake joy?
exactly what
And
I was about to ask you. Is like,
yes,
where's joy? Like, where's joy in your life if
yes.
every day is so hard? How do you find that?
It is recognize. It's exactly what I said. It's recognizing the things that God is doing all around us that are just like these mini miracles,
Mm.
and having a lot of gratitude for the things that we have all around us. I know gratitude is thrown around so much, but like for
Yeah.
me, that has really centered me. I mean,
Mm.
because it's so easy to, when you're looking at just the hard, to lose perspective on everything in life and just to go,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, gosh, okay, this is my lot in life and I don't like it and I don't want this. But when you go, okay, like look around you, Lindsay, and there is so much suffering in this world. You're not alone in
Mm.
this. And I think
Wow.
for me, working in Bottle of Tears, like I get this kind of inside glimpse
Mm.
of all these different people's stories. And it's devastating, Davey, because
Yeah.
there is suffering everywhere. But at the same
Yeah.
time, it's perspective for me to go, like, we're all in this together. Our suffering doesn't look the same. Our grief is going to
Mm.
feel and look different, but we're in it together and we can still love each other really well in the midst of it.
Yeah.
So I would say perspective and just noticing God's little kindness is the
Yeah.
way that I wake up. And also, this is a biggie, is that it's a choice for me. Like it is a choice
Mm.
to choose joy every day. And it's taken practice. Like probably 12
Yeah.
years ago, I did not wake up every morning with a smile on my face. No way. Like
Mm.
I was suffering and I was questioning God, and I still question God, don't get me wrong. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a choice to wake up and just choose to see God in the little things around me.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a lot of folks that reach out to us on our platform, listen to the podcast, who ask about chronic illness and chronic
Yeah.
pain because, it's there are some of those stories where you're able to see a kind of start and finish, like you said, like a
Mm-hmm.
red bow. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, look at how God brought them through this and
Yeah.
on to the other side, right? And
Yeah.
certainly there are stories like that, and they're so
Yeah.
inspiring to us, and they give us
Totally.
hope and perseverance to walk through it well, right? That we can
Yeah.
suffer. But I think one of the reasons people reach out a lot about this topic, when it comes to just chronic illness, is because they don't see an end in sight. They're going,
Yeah.
maybe there's not an end in sight on this side of eternity. And so
Mm-hmm.
how do I find that kind of joy? And yet I
Yeah.
bet they're also wrestling with some things in terms of who God is.
Oh,
And,
completely.
because depending on the streams that you swim in, there might be some heavy emphasis on deliverance and healing and these momentary,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
boom, God brought you out,
Yeah.
which absolutely exists, right? We've all
Yes.
seen that. That definitely
Totally.
does
Yeah.
exist. And
Yeah.
then there's some who would kind of adhere to, you know, more of an emphasis on, the deliverance comes when we're on the other side of eternity, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so obviously there's a little bit of a fluidity in both but I
Yeah.
wonder, as you guys are walking through this, how do you reconcile that?
Yeah.
Do you hope for deliverance and
Mm.
healing, and do you not? How do you do that?
Yeah.
Because hope
Yeah.
deferred makes the heart sick, and there's so many
Yes.
emotions
Oh
involved
yeah.
with that.
Yeah. I'm like, this is the $1 million question of chronic
Yeah.
illness, but also just prolonged pain and suffering and I think
Yeah.
I first want to speak to the people that don't have the deliverance this side of heaven, and those people that are suffering that,
Mm.
I think for so long, like I had people tell me, you don't have enough faith, Lindsay. You just need to have more faith. Like when you're praying that God will heal you, and y'all, that's not true. That is just not the character of the God that I serve. And
Yeah.
he loves you so much. So for those of you that are suffering in silence right now, I want you to hear that I see you. I'm walking that road
Mm.
with you. And I do believe in a God that could heal instantaneously, you know. And for some
Yeah.
reason, he has not chosen to do that for me yet, this side of
Mm.
heaven. Now, could he? Yes. Have I had the most godly, amazing women cry and pray over me just for that, and it still not
Mm.
happen? Yes. And there is a
Mm.
grief and a sadness in that of like, God, why not me? Like, why I would do so many
Yeah.
great things if you would really heal me.
Right.
So I just want those people to know I see you and it's not a lack of faith. And
Mm.
I mean, and that, and God sees you most of all, and he sees
Yeah.
you, how you're walking through it, and he loves you. I think for me, it is a question. I mean, you're going to have to wrestle with this. I mean, for me, I
Yeah.
will wrestle with this until I meet Jesus face to face.
Yeah.
Because not only do I have chronic illness, but I have a child that, with
Yeah.
no fault of her own, has brain damage, Davey.
Yeah.
And I watch her daily suffer, and she's almost tormented daily. And
Man.
there are so many questions I have for God. Like why, like
Mm.
it's almost like I can take on my own suffering, and like I can be okay
Yeah.
with that, but it's really hard watching my child suffer. Um
Yeah.
and at the same time going, but for some reason, Lord, this is our story. And I
Yeah.
don't want to run from my story. I want to share it. I want people to not feel alone in their pain. I think a lot of times we hear speakers, or people that have written books, or people that are kind of the big
Yeah.
time Christian names, share about their suffering after the fact. They'll share
Yeah.
like, oh,
Right.
I went through this season and then look at what God did. And they,
Yeah.
which is great. And we need to hear that too. But I kind of felt like God was saying, Lindsay, like, I want you to share your story in the middle of it. Like
That's
when
right.
when there
That's right.
isn't there still aren't answers, and you're still
Yeah.
suffering, and I want you to be a voice for those people that feel alone in it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Mm.
it is a hard
Wow.
question, I mean, to reconcile, but it is just a daily surrender. It's for us, it is for Chris and I, we say it is 1 minute at a time. And it's not getting
Yeah.
ourselves
Yeah.
too focused on the what ifs of the future, because that can really make me spiral if I do that.
Right.
But just taking
Right.
it one step at a time.
Wow. You're so right. That very, very, I hadn't thought about that, but a lot of, Christian prominent speakers or
Yeah.
names or, public figures, they will share after the fact. You don't often hear
Mhm.
them talking about, hey, I'm really going through something difficult right
Yeah.
now. You
Yeah.
know,
Or like
it's
my
like,
marriage
it's
is
like
really
only,
struggling, or my, yeah.
it's really on the right. Yeah. And usually these
Yeah.
things surface or they start talking about it and you're surprised
Hmm.
by it. You're like, wait a minute. I mean, I've been
Totally.
listening to you for the past couple of years and you haven't said anything about this. I didn't know that was what
Yeah.
was going on underneath the surface.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we would talk a little bit more about our suffering in the midst of it, as you were doing, if the
Yeah.
church would be able to have a little bit better language and a better
Million.
theology of suffering,
Yeah. I mean,
right?
that is it.
We would,
Yes.
we
It
would be able
is.
to start, first of
Yeah.
all, find solidarity and go, yeah, yeah, me too. I
Hmm.
feel, oh, man, and I'm going to be honest about this as well. Now we're going to wrestle with it together. And we're going to
Yeah.
come to an even greater understanding of who God is, his character and his nature in the midst of our suffering, because we're
Yeah.
talking about it
And
in the midst of our suffering.
yeah, and we have so much to learn from other people's stories of grief and suffering. Like
That's it.
it may not be the same. Like you and I have different stories of suffering, but oh my word,
Right.
am I going to learn something new from hearing the way you're walking through it?
Hmm.
And if we keep that to ourselves because we're afraid of looking messy or afraid of
Yeah.
not having it together, then we're missing out. Like you're missing out
Mm.
on living life fully. And you're
That's
also
right.
missing out on just that community of like building a true like community that really is in it with each other because
Mm.
community is messy, you know? And so when you're
Yep.
sharing
Yep.
your hard stuff, it's not always going to be just this like beautiful picture, you know, that you can,
Right.
um, yeah, that you can picture. But that is where true fellowship happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah.
Lindsay, I'd like to ask a question that might be a little bit taboo of a question, but I'm going to go for it
Yeah.
anyways.
I'm an
Because I
open
feel
book.
like, yeah, I feel like people often don't want to share kind of the ugly parts of this, but you know, um, most parents, I feel
Mhm.
like, have a season in the beginning, especially after having a baby, where they're like, man, what have we done? Right?
Mhm.
Why did we do this? But, as you guys are walking with your daughter and, she has this, some level of brain damage,
Mhm.
and it's created such hardship and suffering
Yeah.
in your household, can you talk to me about some of those moments where you're like, did you ever feel and have you felt this like, man, what if we had not done this? Like, we regret this. We feel like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if so, talk to me about that because I feel like there's so many people who they feel that silently, but they don't feel like they can admit that. And so they just
Yeah.
suffer silently.
Yeah. I think for Chris and I, our heart, we had a passion and a love for the country of Guatemala. And I had spent some of my college years getting to work in different children's homes. And truly, I remember praying in one of my children's homes, like, God, if you choose for me to get married, please let my husband have the same heart for this country.
Mm.
And the first time that Chris and I got to go together, I mean, he took my passion and multiplied it times like 100. Like he fell in love with the people in the country. And so for us, adoption was always our number one. And we
Yeah.
always tell Eliana, you are our plan A. Like we
Mm.
knew we were going to adopt from Guatemala if that was God's plan for us. Um, and in our plan we thought, oh, we'd have more kids or adopt
Yeah.
more or have biological kids, and that just quickly was not the case. And there has
Yeah.
also been grief in that
Yeah.
of just going like, oh wow, this is not how we thought our family was going to look, this
Yeah.
this side of heaven. But so we go through the adoption, and that was actually really hard. I ended up
Mm.
moving to Guatemala and living there for 4 months with Eliana because we kind of got stuck in the system. And so I'm a first time mom in a third world country with a
Mm.
baby that doesn't sleep and is very sick, and going, oh no, God, what did we do? Like,
Mm.
what is happening? I don't know what I'm doing. Um, we need you, like this is too much. And then over the next 8 years, just walking, just I can't emphasize how
Right.
much only sleeping 2 to 3 hours a day as
Jeez.
a family of three was exhausting. And in
Oh, of
those
course.
nights she would, not on a fault of her own, but she would rage for 4 and 5 hours a night,
Wow.
Davey. And
Wow.
so we are holding our baby girl who we love with everything in us and watching her just
Mm.
rage and scream for hours on hours and praying, God, heal her. And doctors saying,
Mm.
we don't know what to do. I mean, they put her on adult doses of Ambien at age 3, and she powered through that.
Oh my gosh.
And in the midst of that, there are people saying, have you tried melatonin? We're like, yes, we have. Or have you? We tried everything under the sun.
Wow.
But there are nights, I would say I question stuff way more than Chris. Chris
Mm,
has this like he is so fiercely her daddy. You have never
mm.
met a dad like him, where it's like he has
Wow.
never had a question of like, what did we do? Did we do something wrong? Now, I, on the other hand, was like, maybe I heard from God wrong. Like maybe we
Mm,
took her out of the country and this was not God's plan. But
yeah.
quickly the Lord would bring something about in our story that was like, oh, Lindsay, no. Like
Mm,
I I chose you to be her parents, like before
yeah.
you were ever born. And there is so much loss and trauma in adoption. No matter if your child has a severe,
Yeah.
if they have severe trauma or not, adoption is trauma for
Yep.
kids. I mean,
Right.
because there is a loss there and they
Yep.
will feel that loss.
Mm,
And so for us, we have always been so open with her. And we talk
mm,
about, how precious she is and that adoption was our number one choice and she's our number one girl. Um,
yeah.
and what's crazy, Davey, is Chris and I are so committed and we have loved her so fiercely for almost
Mm,
15 years now. And she still will say, y'all aren't going to leave me, are you, Mama? And so her little
oh
brain
man. Oh.
still feels that.
Yep.
So it is,
Yep.
I want to speak to the adopted parents too of just, you cannot outlove trauma. You can do a great
Right.
job and you can love them really, really well. But there are some
Wow.
cases where you just have to keep trusting God with every little step. But it has
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
a journey with Eliana of trying to figure out like how to keep her safe and then how to love her and how to give her space to try to be a kid. It's like what I said earlier. When we
Yeah.
see her laugh, Davy, it is like we won the lottery. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
She got belly laughing yesterday, and I was like, well, my week has been made. Like, this is the best thing ever. Because you don't take I
Wow.
mean, I think it's easy to take those things for granted when you've watched your child
Yeah.
just, be just live through torment. So
Right. Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if does that
Oh
answer
man.
that question? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know,
And God, I was going to say in the middle of that too, that God has
yeah.
taught us so much about perseverance and patience and things we would have never learned
Mm,
if we had it easy. And so
yeah.
people will say, would you go back and like adopt her knowing all that you know now? And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, we would go back a
Wow.
million times over and she is our child. We would do it a million
Wow.
times to have her. So, and
Mm,
what God has taught us through it is invaluable. But guess what? We're still exhausted and we still walk through
yeah.
grief daily. It's not
Yeah.
it's a joy and a grief that's coexisting at all times. And that's our parenthood
Mm,
journey.
man.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Lindsay, I'm always trying to find the marrying of or the overlapping of like the spiritual and the practical, because I think that there's so much in the practical that's very spiritual too. But as I sit and talk with other couples who are widowed,
Yeah.
we when we're not talking on air, we're like just sitting in a living room and we're
Yeah.
talking like we're both talking about there are moments that God just showed up that we can't explain, right? Where it's
Mm-hmm.
like there was no
Mm-hmm.
strategy to this. There's just like the supernatural power of God in our story. And we also swap like almost best practices in some ways. Like what are you doing how are you, like we get down to
Yeah.
kind of the brass tacks of the very practical as well. And that's always so helpful to walk out of those conversations. I wonder what you would say if you were sitting down with some parents who just received a diagnosis of a child with special challenges, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe you can answer that with that scenario, and also with adoption. You just
Mm-hmm.
spoke to the trauma that that is associated with adoption. But as you're kind of like, if you're sitting and counseling some parents and they're looking for some practical, not to diminish like, oh, here's how God showed up in big ways, because we absolutely need that as an undergirding and a thread through all of this. But here's some things that we've learned along the journey that we think would be really helpful for you as you're stepping into this. What would you say?
Yeah. I think the number one for Chris and I was to really, really focus as much as we could on our marriage. And we had to be a team and we had to be on the same page from the beginning, or it would not have been sustainable. I mean,
Wow.
I think the divorce rate for a special needs parent is like 70% or what I mean it like
Wow.
is skyrocket even more than the statistics today. And so I think my greatest thing is just to really nurture your relationship with your spouse. And if you don't have a spouse,
Yeah.
whatever, a friend or what, have someone that can be your teammate on this, that you're going to
Yeah.
be able to be on the same page with. And I think that's huge. Also, this took us 12 years, but finding a community that really gets it, that gets you,
Mm.
is going to be huge because you're going to have support. And for the first,
Yeah.
8 to 10 years of our walk with Eliana, we didn't have it. And I'm telling you, the isolation kills. It does. And
Mm.
I was walking in isolation for so long. And that is when Satan can really just get in there and trick you
Yeah.
and lie to you and tell you your life's over when it's not.
Yeah.
And so you need to have voices. And I would say that with someone with chronic illness too. It's not just about your children. It's if you're walking in something in a silent suffering, you need people speaking
Mm.
into your life. And so it's going to take
That's
you
good.
being, yeah, it's going to take you being vulnerable first and saying, hey,
Mm.
guess what? Like, I really need you. And that's a hard thing to
Wow.
say when you feel broken. But for me, like, it has been so life changing. The community group we're in
Mm.
right now, Davey, has been just radically life changing for us. Like we can text them at a
Wow.
moment and they will be there. Like we can say, pray right now for Eliana. And we know that they are literally on their knees. So I
Yeah.
think, the having the teammate, having the community, and this one is Chris and I, but it is to have fun, like even in the
Mm.
pain and the suffering. And
That's good.
this is our family verse, Davy, is Proverbs 14:13. Even in laughter, the heart may ache, and the end of joy may be grief. And I remember someone saying, "Well, that is a really
Wow.
depressing family verse." But I'm like, no, like that. I'm like, for us, that's it. It is 1 minute laughing our head off and then crying
Wow.
5 minutes later and being able to have those things coexist together. Um, Without
Man.
laughter and fun, it's really hard to make it to your next day. So, I mean, I think those are a
Mm.
few of how we have made it through the last 12 years is, you know, it was doing it wrong for 8 to 10 years of not being
Yeah.
vulnerable and not having community. And then every day
Yeah.
praying, God, please bring just, one person that gets it. And he has,
Wow.
in the last couple of years, just really blessed us with people that really want to link arms with us. So,
Wow. Wow. Man, that's amazing.
yeah.
All right. One more question, Lindsey. Then I wanna talk some more about Bottle of Tears, because
Yeah.
I want people to know how they can get connected with that.
Yeah.
And then of course the book that you've just written recently, Sacred
Yeah.
Tears. But here's the thing it's been a burning question for me, because
Yeah.
Jehovah Rapha, God is my
Mm-hmm.
healer.
Mm-hmm.
In your story and
Mm-hmm.
in what you walk through every single day, what is your understanding of Jehovah Rapha? And maybe I can ask it this way. the word healing probably takes
Yeah.
on a whole different meaning for you.
Mm-hmm. It
And
does.
that's, we talk so much about what it looks like to heal through suffering. And regardless of whether or not you're experiencing healing, you can experience healing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how would that be true for you? What does healing look like for you?
For me, it has been a process of healing so much of my heart and um,
Mm,
so much of my mind. And I have watched God heal. I don't know if you've talked a lot about like your little self when you were little, but I talk a lot with my counselor about
mm.
little Lindsay, and even yesterday we were healing parts of the little Lindsay that needed, whatever it was yesterday. And
Wow.
for me, that has been
Wow.
healing. It has been just digging into places inside of me that have been broken and lost that I thought never would change. And God, oh my
Mm,
word, He is showing up and healing me in ways that I never could have imagined. A couple years ago, right before COVID hit, I had the incredible opportunity to go to Onsite, which is
mm.
kind of
Yeah.
a in-depth, counseling session, but you do all of this like
Yeah.
psychodrama and stuff. And I'm
Right.
telling you, it was the beginning of so much life change for me, of just going,
Mm,
your body may be broken, but guess what? Your heart and mind aren't. And God
mm.
He is healing me day by day. And
Wow.
I have, I've had a few amazing counselors along the way. Our family is like pro therapy. Like you've never met a family more
Yep.
pro therapy.
Yep.
And my
Absolutely.
my therapist now is just able, she's almost like a spiritual director. She's so unbelievable.
Mm,
And she is
wow.
getting to help me walk through places in my life. And like even yesterday, Davey, I was feeling so much panic and anxiety, honestly, like uh, over sharing my story today. That was part of it. And then we have another
Mm,
big meeting with something coming in the future for our family. And I was telling her like
yeah.
all this stuff, and she was able to just say, like, let's bring God into this, Lindsay. Like, let's
That's
bring
right.
him into this. And so we closed our eyes and just pictured Jesus sitting with me while I talked to you, Davey. And it was the most
Oh, wow.
healing, beautiful
Wow.
thing that I mean, I was just weeping yesterday. And so
Oh,
that has been my
man.
journey of healing, is like, whether my body is in pain or not, or I deal with incredible fatigue. So there are days I can't get out of bed, but he's not
Hmm.
done with me, and I'm not done.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
as long as I have breath in my lungs, like I'm going to
Mm,
keep speaking, and I want God to
wow.
keep using me.
Wow. Well, I'll say this for the record, Lindsay. Your story is beautiful and
Mm,
amazing, and the heart that you carry with
mm,
it is unprecedented. I mean,
mm,
just to see how you have been one in communion with the Lord through all of this suffering, I'm so inspired. And I know that
mm,
this, just what you've shared today, and vulnerability, but also in just strength and power and
mm,
resilience to say, hey, God sees you. He is with
mm,
you.
mm.
He loves you, and he is
Yeah.
carrying you through this. And you may not experience healing on this side of eternity in the way that you want it to, but you're experiencing healing,
Yes. Yes.
and he is shaping you and crafting you and molding you even more into the image of who he is. I mean, I'm watching you right now. I'm
Mm, mm,
seeing the
mm,
joy of the Lord in your
mm.
face, and I'm so inspired by that. And I know that
Well, and
tens
even
of
Davey,
thousands of people who are listening to
yeah.
this are inspired by it.
Oh, you're sweet. Well, I think too, even I look at my story and I think, if God healed me 12 years ago, like, I don't know I would have the same joy, truly. Like, I
Yeah,
don't
wow.
think
Wow.
I would be able to sit here, because there is something about having to persevere through
That's
long
right.
suffering that brings a joy that
Hmm.
cannot be contained, and it makes me cry. Um,
Yeah.
so there are moments in my story that I go, thank you, Jesus, that you just continue to meet me even without physical
Mm,
healing, because it's made me who I am today.
man. Wow. Wow. It's like, we all love those movies where we see these athletes or these people that struggle through, they're running a
Hmm.
race or something. And then they finally get to the
Yeah.
finish line, they finish the race or they accomplish the goal. And it's like
Yeah.
this beautiful moment where like, oh, it was so worth it. It was worth all that
Yeah.
suffering. And
Yeah.
this is why scripture tells us that we are running a race,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
we are running to receive a
Yeah.
prize. And it's a prize that is heavenward, that it's upward. It's not
Yeah.
a prize that is material here on earth. It's something that we
Hmm.
can't even fathom, this
Yes.
glory that's going to be revealed to us, through this present suffering. It's being produced out of this present light and momentary affliction. Isn't that what
Yeah.
what scripture says? Doesn't feel that
Yeah.
way right now, does
No,
it?
no, there are moments
But
where I'm like, my life doesn't feel like a mist, but but I'm with
no,
you.
it
Yes.
but
Yeah.
but he says that compared to the eternal weight of glory
Hmm.
that we're going to experience in Christ Jesus, that's where this is feeling light and momentary. And so one
Yeah.
day
Yeah.
we're going to look back and we're going to go, man, it was all worth it. It was all worth
Hmm.
the suffering that we walked through to see the glory of Jesus and the story that he's writing in each one of our lives. It's so
Yeah.
amazing. Did you ever imagine, Lindsey, that Bottle of Tears would be as successful and incredible as it is today?
Oh, no, Davey, like it makes me laugh because I don't know if you've done much about Enneagram, because I'm a 2 on the Enneagram. So there is
Okay. Okay.
zero business savvy inside of my brain, like zero. And so like starting a
Wow.
business is hilarious. And my husband he's a 7 on the Enneagram, so neither of us are. So we both have a
Yeah.
lot of fun, but we are not very, business savvy. But
Wow.
I think when I started Bottle of Tears, I kind of even did it as like, well, maybe this could be like a little Lyme disease fundraiser for me. And maybe I could,
Mm.
make some money for my treatments, or like, honestly, I did not expect for people, like, I thought my friends and family would buy bottles, and
Yeah.
that would kind of be it. Um,
Wow.
and it's been unbelievable because I get to, I mean, I wish y'all could see. I'm in my little office. People will email me like, "Where is your headquarters located?" And I'm like, "My spare bedroom." But it has, yeah, like that's where it is. Um,
I love it.
but it has, yeah, it's really funny.
That's
But
all right.
when I started Bottle of Tears, I had no idea. Like, I mean, Davey, I haven't done a
Mm.
single thing of marketing ever. And so I've been doing
Yeah.
this for like 8 years. And so all of this has been just organic and God. That's all I can say, is that
Yeah.
He
Wow.
has made this happen. And so that's been
Wow.
God showing up in my story big time. That is like really surprising. Like, I mean, I look at my orders every day and I'm like, how did this person find me in Connecticut or like some random like
Yep.
city? I'm
Yep.
like, this is so crazy. And
Right. Oh
but it's
man.
been so beautiful, like that, I'm almost to my 20,000th order, which is crazy.
Wow.
Um, I know,
Wow.
and I'm doing it in the margins of my life. I'm doing it in the margins of
Yeah.
feeling okay and Eliana being okay. And
Mm.
I just
Wow.
love that in the midst of that, like even some of those orders have like multiple bottles. So I'm like, look at all
Yeah.
these people that are going to feel seen.
Yeah.
Like that is my
That's
whole,
right.
the purpose is I want people to have just like a small tangible reminder that they aren't alone. And my
Yep.
husband always
Yep.
jokes and says grief lasts longer than the casserole, because, when someone
Mm-hmm.
has something hard happen, they get all the food and the
Yeah.
flowers and whatever. And, then the grief continues, and then people forget to show up,
Yeah.
or
Right.
you feel alone in it. And so for these people to get like this bottle, this tangible reminder that God sees them, is just the
Mm.
sweetest thing. And I have seen some of the coolest stories happen that was only God. he has been so in the details.
Wow.
I remember one of the first years that I sent out bottles, I get to pray over each person that, because I am
Yeah.
my own business. It's me that does
Yep.
everything.
Right.
And
Right.
so I was praying over this order, and this person had ordered an amber colored vintage bottle. And I remember
Mm.
thinking, okay, and I just grabbed a vintage bottle off my shelf and I'm praying for this family. And on the bottle had it etched that it was Frank's Safe Kidney and Liver Cure bottle. So I pray over it, send it
Wow.
out. The person emails me and said, you have no idea this, but her sister died in a car wreck and she donated her organs. And the two organs that were donated
Oh
were
my
the
gosh.
kidney and liver. And that was what was etched on the bottle, Davey. Like, how
Wow.
cool is God that that happened? I mean, so
Nobody can
yes.
write that
Oh,
story like God. Oh my
no.
gosh.
I was like, he knew that this person needed that
Yeah.
comfort. Like, and then
Yeah.
there was one time that one girl, I got two orders for the same girl in one day. And I thought,
Mm.
well, that's sad. I wish these were spread out for her, but I guess I'll go ahead and send them. And
Mm.
someone bought like a medium aqua bottle and someone bought a small aqua bottle for her. So I send them both to her. And she writes me back and she said, Lindsay, we were in the process of adopting a little girl, and she had walked through infertility and got pregnant. And within 3 days' time, she lost her baby that they got pregnant with, and then lost their adoption. So she said, God knew I didn't need one bottle; I needed two bottles,
Wow.
one for each of my babies that I just lost. And
Wow.
those two people that sent her gifts didn't know each other, Davy. Like, but God knew,
Goodness.
that. So it just blows me away what I've gotten to witness
Wow.
just from my end of getting to do this as a small
Wow.
business. Yeah.
Wow. Man. Well, people are always asking us, hey, what would you
Yeah.
suggest if we have someone in our life that has gone through some kind of grief, loss, pain,
Yeah.
whatever? What do we do? Right. And we always tell them, hey,
Yeah.
first of all, show up. Right. But second of
Yes.
all, we try to give them practical things to
Yeah.
give them to say, hey, you're seen, you're heard.
Yeah.
Right. We see you, we
Yeah.
hear you. God's with you.
Yeah.
He loves you. And, I know when I lost my wife, there were a lot of really
Mm.
weird things that were sent to me. I can
I'm
tell you right
sure.
now,
I'm
if you're
sure.
listening to this, the things you need to send to them is you need to go to Bottle of Tears and send them this, because this is such a
Oh,
beautiful,
baby.
it's a beautiful gift to be
Mm.
able to, just a reminder, just a tangible reminder
Mhm.
that they can sit right there and to say, hey, God is here. And,
Yeah.
and they're gorgeous. I mean, I'm looking at the website right now. They're absolutely
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thanks, baby.
And you've got so many different varieties of it that can
Yeah.
really, as you're thinking through this person and the unique personality that they may have, how you can
Yeah.
cater that gift to them. But, I want to
Yeah.
encourage everybody. We'll put this in the show notes. Make sure you go to Bottle
Yeah.
of Tears and let that be your supplier essentially for
Yeah.
when someone is going through a difficult time in
Yeah.
your life. And
And
and it's just an
yeah.
easy, tangible way to say, hey, I see you and I'm praying
Mm.
for you. I'm with you in this fight.
Yeah. And that your story's not over.
So good.
Because a lot of people walking
That's
through
right.
this feel like it's done. And for you to just get to say, hey, I'm with you in it and I see you.
Mm,
I say I see you all the time because it's that important. I'm like, I cannot stress enough.
wow.
Our culture, we are so busy and we can get so caught up in our own lives and forget to
Yep.
see people all around us suffering. And so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
always encourage people, like, pick one person a week and just like, you don't have to
That's
send a
right.
bottle of tears every week, but like send a text message,
But why not?
write
Yeah.
write
Yeah.
an actual letter to someone, just do something to
That's
show
right.
up. And that takes you
Yeah.
literally 5 minutes, so we can do that once a week,
Yeah.
but thank you. Yeah,
Yeah. I
I'd
think
love to even, sorry.
that's all right. I was going to say, I think people feel like it's a daunting thing
Hmm.
to oh no, what do I do? How do I, and it can be very daunting. And I think there's a spiritual element there where the enemy is trying to create some space or a vacuum to cause that other person to feel alone and cause you to feel intimidated by that. But the reality is just as you described. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, people are so afraid of saying the wrong thing to someone that's going through grief that a lot of times they will just not say anything. And I just want to challenge those of you, like, no, like you don't, you can say one sentence and it will mean the word. You can say, I love you, love whoever on your thing. And like, that is powerful. You don't have to give them a scripture and tell them that God works all things good for those who love him. They don't need to hear that maybe in their moment of trial. Like they need to just hear that they have someone on their team. So I would say just really try to push away those fears of saying the wrong thing and just show up and do something.
Yeah, that's great. That's so good. Whew, man. Yeah. And to your point, the Holy Spirit's going to work in between all of that, where you're going to be blown away. You just do your little step of obedience, your little step of showing up. And then these crazy weird stories like this organ donation story that you just shared. I mean, those are the kinds of things that are going to happen out of you just showing up and ministering to that person. And that right there is just, I mean, thanks for sharing that. That's testimony of like, hey, we don't have to be intimidated by this. Let's show up for each other.
Yeah.
Let's be there. And then let's watch God do what only he can do.
Yes. Amen. That's so good. Yes.
Well, Lindsey, I'm so grateful for the time that we've been able to spend. And I want to make sure everybody goes and checks out Sacred Tears, which is the book that you've just written. And I even see right here, you've got a box set of Sacred Tears book and a clear vintage inspired bottle. So this would be a great gift to give somebody, both the book and a bottle right here in a box set. But make sure you check out both of these because, and even this is a great gift to give somebody who is going through a difficult time, who's suffering silently. And so, but I'm just so grateful for your time, Lindsey, and just sharing your story vulnerably with us and encouraging us. I know so many people are encouraged by this conversation, and I mean, really, God's just using you in a huge, huge way. So thank you.
Thanks, Davey. Yes, I'm so grateful, and I want to give a coupon code to your listeners too. So I'll give you that later.
Awesome.
Yeah,
we would love that. Yeah, we'll put that coupon code, guys, in the show notes. So make sure you check out the show notes right there. If you're watching this on YouTube, we'll put it right there as well. And you guys can get a coupon code for getting that first bottle for yourself, for your family, for someone you love. It'll be.
Oh, I love that. I love that you just said that you can get a bottle for yourself, because I've had people email me and say, "Can I buy one for myself? I need one." And I'm like, "Yes." Oh my gosh. I'm like, we all need that. Don't wait for someone.
That's right. Encourage
to
your
give
own
it
heart.
to you. Yeah, totally. I'm like, I've got a lot of bottles that I love that are my bottles, so
that's
I love
right.
that you said
that's
that.
That's right. Yep. That's so
great.
Good. That's so good. Well, thanks so much for spending time with us today, Lindsey.
Yeah. Thank you, Davey. It's been such an honor.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.